I moved back to this town to take care of my mother, not to fight a war. My mother, Evelyn, has lived in this same wood frame house for 42 years. She's the woman who knows which neighbor's kid has an allergy, who has a spare key to every house on the block, and who still bakes lemon squares for the mailman. She is the heartbeat of this community. But that afternoon, as I pulled into the driveway, the heartbeat stopped. I didn't see my mother tending her rose bushes. I saw two men in heavy black tactical vests with HOA enforcement printed across the back in aggressive white letters. They were physically restraining her on her own front lawn. One had her arm twisted behind her back, the other was gripping her shoulder, forcing her toward a blacked-out SUV idling at the curb. My mother wasn't fighting back. She was just looking at them with a mixture of terror and utter confusion, her small frame trembling under their gloved hands. They were telling her she had to come with them for processing. It was a sight so fundamentally wrong that for a second, my brain couldn't even process it. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute. This was a kidnapping in broad daylight. To understand how we got to that patch of grass, you have to understand what had been happening to our neighborhood over the last year. For decades, the HOA was just a group of neighbors making sure the pool was clean and the streetlights worked. But then Karen Garcia moved in. Karen was the kind of person who viewed a suburban cul-de-sac as a corporate ladder. She became vice president and immediately started talking about modernization and property value protection. In reality, it was a purge. She wanted the older residents out, the ones with the slightly weathered porches and the deep roots, to make room for a younger, more compliant demographic that wouldn't question her authority. When the longtime president stepped down due to health issues, the neighborhood begged my mother to run against Karen. Mom didn't want the power, but she hated seeing her friends being bullied. She announced her candidacy, and that's when the gates of hell opened. The harassment started the next day. Mom began receiving 3, 4, 5 violation notices a week. They cited the color of her porch chairs, the placement of her trash cans, even the lack of uniformity in her flower beds. It was psychological warfare. Karen was trying to build a paper trail to show that my mother was unfit or confused. She started spreading rumors at the local grocery store that Mom was suffering from early-onset dementia and that her run for presidency was a sign of mental instability. My mother stayed calm. She documented every letter, took photos of her compliant property, and kept her head high. She believed that the truth was a fixed point and that as long as she stood on it, she'd be safe. But Karen wasn't playing by the rules of truth. She was playing by the rules of power. The breaking point was a Tuesday. My mother often keeps a small basket of extra vegetables from her garden or groceries on her porch for a neighbor who's been struggling with medical bills. Karen labeled this unauthorized food distribution and a violation of an obscure bylaw regarding commercial activity in a residential zone. She didn't send a letter this time. She sent the enforcement team. These weren't police officers. They were private security contractors Karen had hired using HOA funds, men with no legal authority but plenty of equipment. They arrived with radios, handcuffs, and a sense of entitlement that only comes from being told you're above the law. They told my mother she was being detained for noncompliance and that she needed to come to the HOA office for an immediate administrative review. When I stepped out of my truck, I didn't see enforcers. I saw two thugs assaulting an elderly woman. I walked toward them, my voice steady but carrying the weight of a man who has spent his life around real authority. I told them to let her go. I told them they were trespassing and that their vests didn't give them the right to touch a citizen. The man holding her arm looked at me with a smirk that turned my stomach. He told me this was HOA business and that I needed to step back before I was detained for interference. He tightened his grip on my mother, and she let out a soft, pained whimper. Then, the other man leaned in close to her face. He told her that all of this would go away, that the detention would end right now, if she just signed a paper withdrawing her name from the election. My mother, even in her fear, looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not going anywhere." The man didn't hesitate. He backhanded her. It wasn't a shove, it was a full-force strike that snapped her head to the side and sent her glasses flying into the grass. In that moment, the world went silent. I saw the neighbors on their porches, phones out, frozen in shock. I saw the blood on my mother's lip. And I saw the man reach for a holster on his belt, thinking his fake authority would protect him from the consequences of what he'd just done. He was wrong. The confrontation was over in seconds. I am a licensed, trained carrier, and I have never once wanted to use my weapon. But when he moved toward his hip and kept his hand on my mother, the threat became lethal. I drew and fired. The first man, the one who struck her, went down. The second man, seeing his partner fall, dropped his grip on my mother and tried to run toward the SUV, reaching for his own weapon. I didn't give him the chance to turn around and fire back into a neighborhood full of families. I fired again. The silence that followed was heavy. I immediately holstered my weapon, put my hands behind my head, and shouted for a neighbor to call 911. I knelt by my mother, shielding her body with mine, making sure she was breathing. I didn't move until the real police arrived, the men and women with real badges and a real oath. I complied with every order. I gave them my weapon, my ID, and pointed to the cameras that line my mother's porch. The investigation was a landslide. The enforcement team's own body cameras and the neighbor's cell phone footage showed the entire sequence: the unlawful detention, the extortion attempt regarding the election, and the unprovoked assault on a 68-year-old woman. The surviving enforcer didn't take long to flip. He handed over months of text messages from Karen Garcia. The messages were chilling. She had told them to do whatever is necessary to get her out of the way. She had planned the abduction to keep my mother from showing up to the final candidate forum. Karen was arrested that night. The look on her face when the handcuffs clicked, real handcuffs this time, was one of pure, indignant shock. She truly believed that the HOA bylaws made her a goddess in this 5-block radius. She was charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, assault, civil rights violations, and election interference. The HOA, once her kingdom, collapsed under the weight of the lawsuits. The insurance companies walked away, the board resigned in disgrace, and the organization was legally dissolved by the county. Karen received 24 years in a state penitentiary, and every dime she had went to my mother's medical bills and the community's legal fees. A year has passed. The neighborhood is different now. There are no enforcement SUVs. There are no threatening letters. My mother won that election, but since the HOA was dissolved, she's the president of a neighborhood watch and garden club instead. It's an informal group where the only bylaw is looking out for one another. My mother still has a small scar on her lip, a faint reminder of that day, but her spirit is untouched. We learned that authority isn't something you can wear on a vest or buy with a title. True authority comes from the respect of your peers and the courage to stand up when a bully tries to take what isn't theirs. The silence on our street is back, but it's a good silence now, the kind that comes from knowing that the truth, when backed by a community that refuses to blink, will always find its way home.